So we started off as two of us out of an apartment. Today we're about close to 400 people across Bombay and Gurgaon. So anybody who says they had a very clear vision when they started a company is lying, because nobody does. We had zero clarity. We didn't know what we were going to do.
Hey community, Forcing what's up? This is your boy Sagar Malkar. Welcome to the channel once again and welcome to a brand new video. Today on the podcast I have Varun Dugirala. Varun has been a personal inspiration. I remember texting him when our first podcast was out and he giving me, the tips and tricks to podcasting, because he was a veteran, so to say, in that back then, and he still is. And for people who don't know Varun co-founded Glitch and is the content chief there now. Glitch is one of India's premier content marketing agency kind of thing, and we'll get to know the journey of Glitch much more better in the podcast. Other than that, Varun himself is a content creator. He has two podcasts now. Both of them are leading charts in their particular genres, and he himself is a very, as we go into the podcast, you will understand why I have him on the show as well. And with that being said, let's get into the video. So thank you for being on the show, Varun.
Thanks so much for having me, Sagar. And honestly, it's I'm sorry. I know I have cancelled on you a couple of times. So I will publicly, openly say I have cancelled on you, and that I have to make sure the content is good enough on this episode because of the cancellations.
Not at all. I think you being here itself is amazing, and I have myself cancelled on you a couple of times. So sorry for that. So yeah, man. Before we get into your journey and all of that, do you want to maybe give a brief history on how Glitch started and what it's doing now, so that people know what company that you founded are we talking about?
Yeah, so a bit of background, right? So I come from a place called Kakinada. It's on the coast of Andhra Pradesh. I came from a family of largely engineers and doctors. So I did my engineering out of Bangalore. Didn't necessarily enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Ended up studying media after a couple of jobs I did in Bangalore. I studied media in Pune, and that's where I met Rohit, my co-founder. Both of us moved to Bombay together. I worked in MTV. He was in Channel V. I later moved to Channel V. So I used to produce shows for them. Rohit used to do a lot of promo work. We quit to start Glitch in 2009. The reason why we did that is because Channel V was moving towards no more music but a lot more shows as a channel, and we were also looking for, we had a bit of an itch to see what more we could do. We both enjoyed the whole digital space, and we thought that will be a great place to try out. So the Glitch started off in 2009 as a production company. We were a production company for the web. We tried to work with brands and platforms, anybody we could find who would give us work to kind of create stuff for the web. Along the way, as we started doing stuff with brands, we realized that they were asking us for things beyond what we were doing, which was not just production or not just some tech activations, but they were actually asking us for strategy, asking us for long-term involvement. And that's when we actually became an agency. So we kind of pivoted to being an agency, I would say about 2-3 years into our lifespan as Glitch. And post that, it's been that. It's every year we're gonna take. I call us a evolving agency, because every year we kind of rejig what we do. So we started off as two of us out of an apartment. Today we're about close to 400 people across Bombay and Gurgaon. We work with a wide spread of brands. Some of our clients include Netflix, large part of Unilever, Diageo, LinkedIn, Lenovo, Dell, many others. So and we're an interesting mix of the agency side, the content and production side. We keep adding newer things every year. So that's a bit of background on the company.
Right. And especially the type of content that Glitch has been working on has been, as someone who is into content production himself, has been just inspiring, and the kind of work that you do is great. And I'm sure especially if you want to know what Glitch stands for, just visit their website. I mean, that's the coolest website hands down that I've ever seen, and I'll link it down below and you can check it out. But how did all this start? Like, how did your interest into the content world started? I mean, you were not pursuing that per se. How did that start?
It was actually by chance. So I actually joined Symbiosis in Pune as a PR student because I had actually worked as a promoter for a couple of alcohol brands in Bangalore, and then I joined Symbiosis. And
Right.
but the good part was the initial couple of semesters were a combined piece for all streams. I think within the first 3 weeks, I went to my head of, I think a director or a deputy director, and I said, "Can I switch to audiovisual production?" Because I generally found that a lot more exciting.
Right.
I would say the my entire if someone says, okay, what did you consume the most in your in when you in the 90s, I would say I was a huge consumer of music television. That's where we all learned so many things in terms of formats, just content in general and our perception of it. So the only place I ever wanted to work was in MTV. Thankfully could do that. Second preference was a channel V. I ended up working there as well. So I would say those about 3-4 years when I worked in both those channels, for me it was, that's where I would say my entire foundation of how I look at content kind of started off. Understood different kinds of formats, understood what works with different people. We were allowed to experiment a lot, so we tried a lot of things. And so I even go back to some of those even today because they helped me kind of put structure around content, and that's what I always enjoyed. I always enjoyed putting structure around content and kind of just dabbling with all sides of it. And the good part with how it is now is that you can pretty much try and do everything, right? You don't necessarily have to do only one thing.
Right, right. You know, one of the recurring themes in all the TEDx talks that you have given or your conversation, right? And you started with it, that you started from a small town. How
Yeah.
does that work out? You know, media industry, so to say, has had this bad name of being a glamorous industry, you know, and the whole talk around nepotism that goes on, you know, every weekend. You'll see that it is not perceived as a welcoming industry. But how does the small town story go? Like, and you also talk about small town mindset, and I was very curious when you know coined, I won't say you coined the term, but I've heard you you know talking
Yeah.
about it a lot. Maybe you can walk me over that and what that's like. What's the small town mindset like?
So, you know, when I was growing up, obviously the internet, I mean, I don't even remember the internet till I was a little older. It shows that I'm older than when most people would be listening to this. But I think the learning for me was the fact that you had access to very few careers, right? I mean, everybody you knew was either trying to be a doctor, trying to be an engineer, maybe they were trying to be a lawyer, but or commerce, right? That literally were the only options. You didn't know what else. And I always wanted to work in the media space. I think only reason why, because I thought it looked like it was a lot more fun than anything else. And so when I say small town mindset, the worry always was that you have access to less information. So when you do come to a city to work, do the people who who've actually grown up in cities, they obviously have more exposure than you would. I thankfully had parents who gave me a lot of exposure from the time I was younger. They, we traveled. They were very open about me learning different things. So that thankfully helped me. But I would say there are pros and cons to this, right? If you've always been in a city, sometimes you don't understand how the wider part of the country functions. In general, right? I mean, how would someone who is sitting in coastal Andhra consume content versus how would somebody sitting in let's say rural Punjab consume content, right? So most times your idea of understanding consumers was the fact that it was just about perception, right? So you would go to caricature. So, you know, that whole term about people say, are you South Indian? And I'm like, that's not like a thing, right? There's so many sides to
South
it.
Indians,
So many
right.
states, so many regions. So in a similar way, I think that was the problem then. I don't think it exists as much now because I feel thanks to the internet, that has been made a lot more level. So because of that, we're now at a point where you can be exposed to so much more wherever you are. But the mindset is largely because of the wider, I would say, the wider society not being exposed to too many of these things. To give an example, when I became a producer in television, which was generally the person who was managing the entire thing and overseeing creative as well as logistics, one of the first questions I would get asked when I would go back home by someone I would meet would say, "Oh, you're a producer, which means are you putting money into the shows, right?"
That hasn't changed yet.
Yeah.
That's,
So I had to
that's
constantly
still the
explain to them, right?
Yeah.
To explain to people what I do, even till now, sometimes, and I would say slightly older people, I think younger ones get it a lot easier. Is still something, and I think that's really the gap, right? That small term mindset is that gap, but the positive, and I've always looked at it as a positive, that I know a lot more about what is beyond a Bombay or beyond a Delhi than most other people would if they were born brought up in the city. So it's always a positive, and that's what I tell everybody. Don't ever feel like it's a negative that you weren't born in a metro. It's I mean, there's a positive there.
Right, right. So, and that's interesting that you talk about it, but I'd like to dig more deep into it. Do you think that affects your, self-esteem somewhere? Do you, because
course.
maybe that might be like, how does that work out? And I'm sure if you could talk about how it affected you, and then how you took
Yeah.
a step back and looked at it again, because I'm sure there are many people from outside that are trying to
Yeah.
enter the industry, right? And I'm sure that might help them.
It's simple, right? When each place has a certain culture, it means that you dress a certain way, you speak a certain way, you are used to certain kinds of conversations, your knowledge base is certain. When I first moved to Bangalore from Kakinada, I remember that I had a huge inferiority complex. I would always feel like the least cool person in the room. People had obviously seen and done a lot more things. The stuff which I thought was cool turned out to be not so cool. In hindsight, that was also true, because I think I had a fluorescent yellow shirt for some reason which I don't understand yet, or checkered pants, and I think that was the first instance of me realizing I need to think about what I wear a lot more. And it's just stuff like that, right? And that always takes you onto a back foot, but at some point, you need to make that switch as an individual to kind of turn around and say, no, 1 second, everybody has different experiences. These are mine, and let me just try and take some positives out of it, right? So it's about switching your mindset. It took me years to do that. I would say that I spent a good 7 years in Bangalore, and I would say till the end of it, I still had some pieces of that. It was only when I kind of moved to Pune and started studying there is when I made a conscious decision that no, I will not allow that to be part of my personality anymore. That I will not work from a point of inferiority. I will work from the fact that I have experiences and they count. And that's when I kind of changed how I was. And sometimes you have to sit yourself down and kind of turn around and say, once again, there is nothing called inferior, superior, no matter where you're from. It's about how you project yourself and how you're honest with yourself. I mean, and I think that's the most important thing to do.
In the content agency that you are, it gives me immense pleasure and happiness when I meet people like you who have built something from ground up, because to overtake something or to join something and then build it is a whole different thing, and building and ideating and then creating something out of nothing is something has always fascinated me. How was that like? How was the mindset like doing that, creating something which I'm sure you had a vision of where you wanted to take Glitch ad, but starting from nothing, starting from your living room, how was that like?
Yeah. So anybody who says they had a very clear vision when they started a company is lying, because nobody does. We had zero clarity. We didn't know what we were going to do. We knew we wanted to quit. We knew that both of us didn't have too many responsibilities to take care of. I mean, we just had to make sure that we had enough money for our rent and for food and maybe the odd beer here and there. And that was literally our focus, to make sure do we have enough money to survive? We spent 6 months thinking of the name. We spent 1 month thinking about what we will actually do. We had one project when we started off. After that, we didn't have a project for at least another month, where we were like, okay, is this even going to work? Should we start looking for a job? So I would say visions evolve, right? You start off with saying, okay, there are a set of things I really want to do, but you might not necessarily be able to do them from day one. We wanted to work with by creating digital content from day one. I would say for the first 2 years, digital content was almost 20% of what we did. 80% was stuff for television. We've done like promos for DVDs. We've done like all kinds of pieces, right? Because you have to keep the whole thing sustainable, and over time keep pushing what you really want to do. And eventually a large part of what you do will become what you wanted to do. That's the first part. The second part is that what you thought you wanted to start the company for on day one versus what you're doing even 6 months down the line, a year down the line, 5 years down the line, always changes. So we don't think in 5-year plans. We've never thought. We've always thought in 6-year or 1-year plans, 6-month or 1-year plans, and the whole point of that was that the world we operate in changes so quickly that you have to constantly adapt. So I think every year we sit down and say, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to throw out? What do we need to add in? And that's always the good way to do. And like I said, anybody who says they have a solid vision before they start, they'll also tell you that they've had to evolve that vision over time. And then you have to think about which parts will be permanent and which parts are flexible.
You know, you have worked with some really big names in the media industry, right? Roshan Abbas sir is one of the first investors that you got on board, and from what I know, he is one of the great mentors that you can get in this media industry.
Oh,
right?
totally.
How much importance do you think mentorship in your business journey plays a role as? And I know it plays a huge role, but how much do you think you knew back when you were starting that you wanted a mentor on board, and then how did it help?
So we didn't actively go looking for mentors. I think we were so busy doing what we were doing. We happened to bump into Roshan. So Roshan had met us when we were in college. He'd come to do a guest lecture and he remembered us from then. I even briefly worked for Encompass for a very short period of time before I went to MTV. But what helped was we did a project for them, and this is how things happen, right? And I always say, while there's a large amount of hard work, sometimes it's just some things are just for chance. Someone we knew was supposed to do a project for Encompass, and he couldn't do it because he had to travel, and he asked us if we can do the graphics for him, and we did the graphics. Roshan happened to see in those graphics and said, okay, I want to meet these guys who made these graphics. And that's how we reconnected. And we just, for us, vibe is very important, right? We had similar, just like mentally we were of the same vibe. He's never till date told us what we should do. He's always told us what he has done in every single stage of our journey where he has been a part of Glitch. And I think that's the most important thing, right? You need to find people who will tell you about how they've done things and not necessarily always tell you, oh, this is what you should do right now. Because if you get someone who will tell you what to do right now, then you will not start thinking independently as well. You won't come up with solutions by yourself. And that's been the best thing about having Roshan, right? And we've always said we value the fact that he has shared so much about his journey. Whenever we've had any problems as a company, from financial to client to anything else, he would always turn around and say, okay, this is what we did. This is what my learnings were from that time. And you should really base your decisions basis X, Y, and Z. But he would always leave the decision to us. And I think that's really important to look for in a mentor, is saying someone who can give you more learnings rather than giving you only direction, because direction is important, but sometimes with direction, it then takes you away from that decision making process.
Right. That's, what a good mentor does. I think, you had Ronnie Screwvala sir on the podcast as well. And in his book, he has a whole chapter where he says how to choose a mentor. And that's the gist of it, that he only tells you what he did, right? And, the same thing Bob Iger also tells in his book, which I know you love his book, and so do I.
I love that book,
yeah, dude. How many times did you read it?
I've read it twice. I've also done. I've read twice, a couple of times actually. I think I've gone through some of the portions. I've put down more times than that. But I've also done his masterclass. So he's done a masterclass.
Same.
Yeah, I've done that as well.
It's almost the same as the book. I didn't find anything more in the masterclass. I was very disappointed with the masterclass. But what were your key takeaways from that book? Because it's a masterpiece. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Bob Iger is the CEO of Disney, ex-CEO. Now he has stepped down. But amazing book, one of the best books you can read if you want to get into the media business. The scale at what Disney was and the decisions he makes, it's amazing. I'll put the link in the first link in the description is his book. What were your key takeaways from that book?
So for me, it's always been, so I'm a huge propagator of people who manage operations in creative companies, right? Because most times they don't get enough credit. Because I think their career graphs really interest me, because at the end of the day, there are creative visionaries, but there are also people who make sure those visionaries can keep the wheels turning. Right. And for me, just generally his entire career journey, right? How he went from stage to stage, how he found solutions to every problem. And if you see some of the problems he's had to face, they are crazy, right? I mean, there's like it's unimaginable how he would
Scary.
manage some of them. And for me, it was so interesting to see how he managed each of those with I mean, there's deep dignity in how you manage some of those things the way he did, and I think there's a great learning there. And also to kind of and the second one was, look at the acquisitions he did, right? I mean, from Marvel to
Marvel,
Lucasfilm to everything.
Pixar.
Yeah, and for me, what showed in each of those acquisitions was the fact that he didn't turn to them and saying, "I want to buy you," right? He wanted to make them to
Right.
feel like they have a partner who will support them and help them
Partner.
grow.
Yeah,
And I think that's another core lesson which I've kind of learned about how to kind of work with other people is to make sure that you're always coming across as someone who wants to be a partner, who has their good intentions and actually their good intentions at heart, and kind of help them scale up from there. I think those are my two key pieces.
Exactly, any investor should, I think every investor should like do a PhD on that book. I mean, the kind of acquisitions he does, and he's always right. I listened to the audiobook, and I think that was read by him, right? So it was so, even when he was speaking, his only intention was to, how do I join the Disney name to his company and get that company growing, rather than, get Disney growing, because that's the end goal of it. But how does that company grow? And it's so amazing, reading such people and the way they do it. Anyways, in that book as well, right? One thing, if you see, the superpower of Bob Iger, so to say, was the way he did their conversations, right? Because you'll see before every big acquisition, it started from a conversation, it started from a dinner, which I also feel is the biggest superpower one can have, to have a good, powerful conversation. Now, knowing you, I am aware that you have that superpower. You have what?
I try as much as I can.
How many episodes did Advertising is Dead complete?
As of the day we're recording this, about 86.
Yeah. Wow, 86 and 15 of the other one, right?
Yeah, useless. So useless is unique as a podcast because it is me having an open experiment. I keep changing the format. I might keep doing that because for me, I'm having a public beta testing process with useless about what works and what doesn't work. So that is what useless information is.
Right. So almost 80 to 100 kind of conversations that you have, and all of them have been somewhat very enriching, right? And how much do you give the importance, or how much do you think talking or having a good conversation is a superpower? And I am sure it's a skill, right? It's a skill like any other skill, and you can pick it up.
Yeah.
How do you suggest one goes about it? How does that work out?
So, I mean, I have a process. I know that multiple people have different ones. My process has always been the fact that I don't think I'm the smartest person in any conversation, right? I always believe that the person I'm talking to is giving me something which is making me smarter. So I always take it from that lens, and which means that I shouldn't always. So the tendency which happens and this happens in professional conversations a lot. Happens in personal conversations if you have in a relationship, is the fact that if some person says something, the tendency is to say something exactly, I mean, at the same level of power from the other end, right? It becomes almost this game of table tennis, and that's not how you have a good conversation. The good conversation is almost to be able to reflect what the other person's saying, make them feel a lot more at ease. And when they feel a lot more at ease, then it really becomes enriching, because then they will share a lot more and they'll be open to you sharing a lot more. But if you make it a competition or like a tug of war, then it's never really going to be an enriching conversation, right? So for me, it's always been that. But I've said I've had 86 sessions of conversations with people which I've learned something from, and for me, I look at it that way. Secondly, I mean, more from a podcast standpoint, or even in general, when I have conversations, I try not to make it seem like that I'm using a lot of jargon. I don't generally like using jargon. I think I use a lot more analogies than I use jargon. So I'll try to equate something to something which is very common, right? One of my most common things I've been using, and I unintentionally have been using for years, is when I talk about a multitasker, I call that person Natraj, right? Which immediately explains what that means. So So sometimes I think in trying to seem like we know a lot, we tend to use words which seem smarter. I think it's more important to actually make it simpler, and making it simple also then invites the other person, right? Makes them also feel like, okay, I'm not suddenly hearing a word I don't know about, so I'm suddenly put off and I become silent. So you almost have to help navigate it, and these are a few things, and talk like a human being. I would have empathy, understand that what you're going to say, how is it going to affect the other person. Just because it will make you think that you are cooler doesn't mean you say something which obviously doesn't go well with the other person. So I try to keep it nice and relaxed and chill. So, and that's been always my theory on any conversation I have.
Right. What do you look out for in a person when they are having a conversation with you? Is there certain things you look out for? Because for me, it's always been how I feel after that conversation, right? How if I'm content and if I feel that I've learned something and I've shared something of value to the other person, I think I've had a good conversation. And it might sound very weird to some people, and that's one reason I named this thing also in conversation with. So if I could share how this started, right? So I was at a networking event and I was talking to a founder of a company, and he was sharing his journey with me, and I was like, dude, if someone was here right now to record this and to share this, there are entrepreneurs like me who would not waste their year doing the same mistake that this man has. And that's why I started the podcast, and I have shared this with you earlier as well, that was the aim, to help budding entrepreneurs or budding content creators or anyone to think better, to do things more efficiently, right? So how I feel after the conversation is my yardstick of judging a conversation. Is there something you use to evaluate a conversation maybe?
I always judge it by saying how I feel post it, and I say if I feel exhausted post it, then it's not a good conversation, right? If you feel like you've had to really struggle to have that chat, if the other person is resistant to talk about things, so I don't like to have tough conversations, right? Nobody does, but I feel that sometimes that's the difference between a conversation and an interview in my mind. A lot of times interviews, especially in the journalistic sense, and I'm not saying I'm not generalizing, but I would say a lot of them become about asking the hard questions. I've never been about asking the hard questions, right? I will not go into those directions. I don't see the need to. But what I feel after conversations is, okay, have I learned something? Do I feel more relaxed than I started off with? Have I come out really excited? Have I come out saying, okay, I learned something? I've almost like you get energy, right? Did I feel energized by this? And then what also kind of works for me is the fact that did I kind of get that person to talk about a lot more things in a far more relaxed manner than they even thought they would? Like I've had episode recordings where I finished it and that person said, I didn't realize that I would be talking so much, or like, you actually got a lot out of me than anybody expected. So I've had that, and I've had like really senior people kind of come in post our recording so I have a small chat with them post recording, generally like about 2-3 minutes. And when they said, okay, I really enjoyed myself, and I've actually spoke a lot more than I normally do. And for me, that really counts. Then I know I've done my job right.
That's a good metric to put in, right? And I think that's very similar to what I said also, right? Because how you feel is so much important that that tells you the so-called, and I'm air quoting this, vibe of the person in the conversation. Anyways, Varun, now I'd like to take you towards content creation and content in general, right? You have been someone who started in the digital media space when it was not called that. It was just internet videos, right? I remember, I don't think I was old enough to remember that when you left MTV, there was no digital content as such. I mean, MTV itself was trying, and they were the leaders, so to say, in revolutionizing content, so to say, in this country, and they were still not doing digital as well, right? But you decided to go and start an agency which was not completely serving to the digital market, but trying to work in that base. How was content back then, and how has it revolutionized till today, and what's the change been like?
So if I look back then, I think back then it required a lot more convincing. You had to turn to people and say, okay, explain to them why they have to do something on digital in the first place. Tell them how it's different. Explain to them that it's not just, and also explain to them, which is still a problem sometimes. I think a digital video and a video that goes on television is still a video, so it shouldn't cost different. It should be the same because you're using the same equipment, right? So I think that is big. I think that's still there. It's not like it's gone away. It's still there.
Still there.
But I think at that point of time, we were trying a lot of things, right? Now we're actually a more structured industry. So there are many things which are now pretty standardized. But at that point of time, you would try anything, right? You had no barriers of experimenting. I think that was great. Like we've gone and sold stuff and which we couldn't figure out how to cost for. Or like in cases like that, we even
Very
sold
different.
stuff which we realized we couldn't cost for. So we actually done stuff for free because the client is like, okay, how do you charge me for this? And I'm like, we don't know how we can charge you for this. So he's like, okay, I'll give you another project. Let's figure some extra money there which I can give you for this. And that's literally what we've done. So I think that was the fun part during that time. And but the good part for us is that while a large part of the industry, which is on the media side, had a very like hardcore television mindset. We came from a time in Channel V and MTV when a lot of the stuff which we did then is actually what I would say the entire framework for digital video today is built on, right? From how we looked at short
100%.
format content to seeing how a lot of stuff that you see people on Instagram and YouTube doing were all stuff which we tried then. So I would say that we just looked at that mindset, and luckily for us, that is exactly what digital video also took on. So I think that was a really strong, I would say, learning that we took with us to create. But it was a lot of fun. It's still a lot of fun. As and when a newer platform comes up, it again becomes the same cycle of things. But I would say that we were one of the earliest ones to kind of turn around and say, what can we do online? And I think that was the thing. Now it's about what can you do on this platform. Then it was like, what can you even do on the internet, right? So I think that was really where we were at.
Right. And how do you think the approach towards contents definitely has changed, as you said, right? But how do you think? I think it has not changed much, but I'd like to hear what you have to say on this. Is that has the content changed? I think I genuinely believe that as much as content reflects us, we also contents also shape us, right? Do you think content has evolved? And I think it has. What do you think? How has content changed? What kind of content did you see back then, and what kind of content do you see now?
So I think we've learned. So traditionally, content was very one way, right? You would create something, you'd put it on, let's say, on in a theater, on television, and you would never get a reaction immediately. You had to go through a lot, and you were not sure about the data about now I think the good part with how content works now is you get immediate feedback, right? You know when a video is done well, or what the comments are, or what the reactions are, what the numbers are. You can look at the fact that, okay, when did people's attention drop? What's your retention rate? So I think the data has really changed how we look at content. So the creation aspects, I mean, I would say COVID has been a big change agent for how we create content now, how we shoot stuff, how many people work on our sets, because that was something which has stayed the same for years, right? Equipment got upgraded, but the systems never did. But now that's a strong focus. But at least over the last 5 years, one of the strongest focus points has been the fact that how do you kind of take feedback from data to make your content creation a lot better. So, and that's been the big change, and I think that's really helped. I mean, it's made things smarter. Simple things like, okay, if you have a 10-second ad spot, if you are not creating, if you're not putting your brand in the first couple of seconds, then it doesn't work because people scroll through that quickly, right? So it's almost at 0 second the brand needs to be there. Stuff like that, which is we could have only learned if we had data access, which we do. I think that's the big change part.
I agree with you. I think data is where the content graph took us very steep upward rise where you could analyze data so fast. And in fact, I was listening to a guy's podcast or something like that, where he was saying that he would see the retention rate, and as soon as he shifted to a regional language, the retention rate would drop. and then he would
Yeah.
know that do not use a colloquial language in your English format content, and that's so amazing. I don't think without that we would have been able to know that that guy would have been able to know what not to use, and people would have just unsubscribed to him if he didn't know that, right? So I think data in that sense has heavily influenced it.
Yeah, my
I
learning
think-
as a podcast host has been the fact that if I don't change the topic of some sort every 7 minutes, people's attention goes away.
Wow.
On average, I have seen that if I go on a topic for more than 7-8 minutes, and I look at the clock constantly, and when I'm doing things, and that's for me, right? It might be very different for someone else, because I know people who do 2 hour long podcasts, and I'm guessing that they have a very different format. But for whoever's consumed mine, in episodes where I've gone on a topic for like 10 minutes, people start zoning out. But that 7 to 8 minute mark has actually been very interesting. What's saying you can stretch a topic till that point, and then you can switch.
I agree. Watching your podcast, I think I listened to almost all of your episodes, at least the recent ones. I haven't had the chance to go and dig the first ones. I think I started listening to you when Ranveer was on your show.
Yeah.
I started to, because I had him the same week, so I was like, let's listen to what he said there and not maybe repeat the questions, right? So, but I think, listening to your podcast, it's like so many topics getting covered. Instead of mine, I like to go deep in one topic. And I think that's a good takeaway.
And but that's also it's also about what works for you as a host, right? It's as simple as, so I know hosts who write a strong series of questions, go only in that order, like 2-3 pages of questions, and do that. I literally scribble like 10 points on my iPad before every chat, because I'm like, if you give me structure, I get stressed. The only chat I've done where I wrote questions down was my Ronnie Screwvala episode, and I feel that I could have done so much better if I didn't write the questions down. Like, I could have actually gotten so much more.
Yeah, but also it comes with the guest stature, right? You don't want to waste the guy's time, taking conversations to no end, right? Anyways, I think, and you led to a very interesting topic there, and I'd like to touch on that, was the 7-minute analogy, so to say, that you gave, that how do you, I don't know how to frame it, and I'll try my best, is how do you try and separate the spirit of the content from the statistics of the content, right? Because you have to change every 7 minutes. And I mean, I'm not saying your podcast, but I'm sure many podcasts out there who are run by networks like podcasting networks, they might have discovered this format, and they have protocols where you have to change it every 7 minutes. But maybe you started a good conversation, then what? Then you have to,
there are no hard rules. Sometimes you should always do the opposite also. So like I might do 7 minutes for a couple of times, but like sometimes when I'm talking, like I'll give you an example. My Tanmay episode recently, I never once looked at the clock, because I realized the conversation was so engrossing that I'm like, it's fine. So
right.
I only look at that clock when I feel the guest needs a little bit of effort. So that's when I keep switching. So, because if the conversation feels like it's very flat, right, at some time, and that happens sometimes, because the content actually might be, with what you're focusing on, that episode might not be super fun or exciting, but it's still deep. It's still deep enough that you can get some insight from it. So then the idea is, so for those, do it, but there are no hard and fast rules. Like, you'll have episodes where you might go on a topic for half an hour and still work.
I get it, but what I was referring to or wanted you to get onto a conversation was the idea of that creativity and the hard and fast rules of production don't go hand in hand. They have to be separate, that you can't be creative and efficient at the same time. What do you think about that? Because I know you are a person, I could call you a creative producer easily, because that's your job, that you understand creatives as well. And I think that's the job of the future producers, right? That you have to be creative. And
you need to know both sides.
Yeah. So how does that work? How does one, understand that creativity or content needs a space to breathe, but you also have to make sure that you are not just ranting for 2 hours. You're getting where I'm going to, right?
I'm getting where you come from.
Yeah.
So it's about balance, right? What becomes primary is the fact that when you become way too logistically involved, or a lot more, then you sometimes worry that you're going to lose the creative side of things, and vice versa. And you'll always fluctuate. Like, I've had episodes where I'm like, okay, I tried to structure this too much. Maybe I didn't get the right kind of content. sometimes they're like, okay, let it be too loose, and maybe because it wasn't as tight as it should be, and that's fine. I look at it almost as a marathon, right? So you will have points when you're not being able to balance it right. Sometimes you're able to balance it, but as long as you learn from each time, it's okay. I did a little too much of that. Let me try and do this, and have people who give you feedback. It's so important to have people who will give you feedback, because like Roshan's again, like a person who will always write to me on and off and say, okay, I like this about the episode, but I would love if you change that, or
I know.
I just generally sometimes write to people and say, what do you think about it?
Right. Same.
And that's the best way to be.
I think that's where we got connected, right? Where I
Yeah.
used to listen to a lot of your podcast, and I sent you, and I think I mentioned you last night in my story as well, saying the same thing, that you just posted a recent post about how podcasts happen and what questions you should ask, and you were the one of the first people who asked me those questions, and I think that has somewhere shaped the way I do podcasts right now. Thanks for that. And I think
Good to hear, man.
I think reaching out to people online, reaching out to people you aspire to work with is so important, that I think growth comes from there, right? I think and I think Gary Vee, and I don't want to be the Gary Vee here, but I think he keeps saying that a lot, right? That text 50 people, text 100 people, and
Yeah.
I'm sure 10 people will reply, and you will grow somewhere there. Amazing. I think Varun, there's so much, and I was discussing this with Prakhar also, my last guest on the podcast yesterday, that it's so, I feel so bad when I get a guest and I have a time limit to talk with them.
Always,
and,
always.
And not because as people we have so many dimensions in us, right? You have your business side, you have your content side, you have your other life side, and there's so much to talk about. We as
Yeah.
people are filled with stories, and
Yeah.
it's so limiting to talk to you about just your business or just your life or just your content creation process. But I'm sure I'll get you on sometime in the future
Yeah,
to
for
talk
sure,
about
man.
your business side. But to end this podcast with, I'd like to get in some entrepreneurship questions, some business questions, so that people who look up to Glitch as a agency that they would like to build in someday in the future also go satisfied out of the podcast. I think maybe we can start with what were the few major challenges that you faced starting bootstrapping a company
Yeah.
like Glitch.
I think I would say that it's phases, right? And your initial set of years are literally about who's going to give you work. Also, if you're a service industry, right? So we were a service company. So for us, like, how do you find people who can give you work? Luckily for us, because we came out of television or 2 television channels, the people we reached out to were from other television channels. So our first set of clients were like Bindas and Disney and Star and MTV and all these guys. And then over time, you need to be able to, and then it's about making sure your work is of the right quality and that you are making money. Most times when you start a company, you don't think about finance, you don't think about operations, all those things, about paying taxes. And I think that's the one thing comes and hits you the hardest, because you realize that there's a whole different side of things which you have not even thought about, which will be a large part of your life. So that's, I would say, the first couple of years is that. What then happens is, as you start hiring people, once you cross, let's say, 10 people, right, 10, 15 people, till 10, 15 people, it's great. It's like a bunch of people just working together, and the dynamics are much simpler to manage. Once you go beyond 15, it then becomes a lot about building a team, managing them, that dynamics as well. Teaching them how to work with clients directly as well. I think one of the things we did very early on was to say that, there's this term called a proprietor-run company. We never wanted to be there. We never wanted to say that, okay, Rohit and I have to be the only front-facing people for the organization. We said, how can we build this to even survive and grow beyond us? Like, at some point, if we decide to say, okay, I'm going to retire, it should still be able to work. We had this standing joke that I think the first email we sent to each other, or the first couple of conversations we had with each other, was the fact that, okay, when are we going to finish this off and retire? And we both had specific years for those. We have not hit those years yet, but I don't think we will retire anytime. And I think that's important, right? You build your team to take on from you. I think we use an analogy at Glitch, which is say that, you all have a plate, and you can only fill it to how much ever the space the plate has, and the plate can't expand. So only when you take something off your plate and give it to somebody else can you add more food onto it. And that's the way we look at building our team. So the second phase is that, yeah.
If I could add on
Yeah.
to it, because I know I'll forget it otherwise, is
Yeah.
that one thing that Radhakrishnan Pillai sir, who is the Chanakya expert, so
Yeah.
to say, in the
Yeah.
industry, he was on our podcast, I think first episode of our podcast, and he was saying this, and I think that is what you said. And to sum it up, that make your company or agency system oriented rather than people oriented, right? There should be a system that works with or without you. And I
Yeah.
think that is one thing, as you said, right? Proprietary agency is what we see, and
Yeah.
not a company agency is what we see.
Yeah,
Right.
because I mean, end of the day, you can't it is impossible for someone to always have the best ideas, to have the best understanding of how to run something, because companies grow and evolve, and that's really helped us. Because and as you then go from being small to medium, that shift of how you even organize things, how teams are built, how different forms of leadership are functioning, and now where we're at, where we from medium to large, we're on that line right now. It's a lot more about, okay, how can you scale this up without having to literally like double everything, right? You can't double the number of people you have. You can't. You have to make sure the quality of your work stays the same, and to kind of scale that up, yet keep the nimbleness that you always had. Never lose the nimbleness in that. So the more you grow, the job becomes a lot more about the people and how they work with each other, in terms of the process of how they work with each other, how they treat each other, how they collaborate with each other, and to facilitate that. But also have enough information in your head that you're not a useless person in a brainstorm, right? You need to still have that ability. So that's the way I would put phases to it, and that's how you grow. I was telling somebody recently that I think he has about 15-20 people in his agency, and he was talking about we were talking about something, and I said that now very soon you're going to have other people front face. And he said, how did you know I was thinking about that? And I was like, that's because it's natural. You're 15-20 people in, you can't talk to every client anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you tell this, and I think we were able to do that with Akshay from Shabang, right? A podcast where we were talking about just the technicalities of an agency, and I'm sure I'll get you on and I'll convince you to do one more podcast on that. But I think what I should end on, and we should end on this podcast, is getting started. Right, I think because then the second part of it will be a good follow-up where the person has started, and now we can educate. I think you can educate them more on how to go and grow. But where do you think how does one get started? I think I was talking with Akshay about the same thing, that how do you get your first client? Because that's where you are, like the first 5 clients you get, then it's just a cakewalk, right? You get references, you get you have work to show and all of that. But the first 5 are not ready to trust you because you're just young guys out of with cameras that you can't. And I mean, with all fairness, I wouldn't either, right? If I was heading an organization, I wouldn't give first chances that easily, because I have something riding on my back as well. How do you think one goes and one starts and then maybe get their first clients? If you could talk on that, and then we can end on that note.
I'm a strong believer in not overthinking these things, right? I mean, you can spend as much time planning it out, as much time mapping it out before you start, and suddenly the world will change. I mean, I'm thinking about, I'll give you an example. It's not about starting. It's about thinking about how this functions, right? Airbnb was going to go for an IPO in March, and COVID happened. Think about the point, and they've had to rethink their entire business. So, and that's literally what will hit you. And so you need to just put the basics in place about what all you might want to do. Start it off and then let it evolve into what it is. I think it's important to start, because if you keep thinking about it, you'll never start. And that's the first point I'd like to make. The second point really is that how do you get people to trust you for work? Is that find people you worked with. Find people who you would know. That's how you get your first client. You get your first client through someone you have met who you've done something for. Word of mouth. Nothing works better than word of mouth, right? So someone says, okay, no, these are young guys. They've done some decent work in their channels. There's a project. Do you want them to bid? And we would go bid, right? And I think that's the only way I know how to get it. we've never had to thankfully do cold calling in our entire journey as Glitch, and it's always been do good job with one client, they'll talk good about you to another client who will give you another project, right? That's literally been how we function. It stays that way till now, thankfully. And that's really the way. Just keep doing good work. I mean, just focus on getting any project. There is nothing called a bad project. There is only a bad experience in a project, or in some cases maybe a brief that you don't enjoy. But if it's still going to pay for the company to sustain, then it's fine. So we've done many projects. We would never showcase them as in our, at least in our early years. I don't think we do that much of those anymore. But in our early years, we've done projects where it didn't make any sense to do them. Like it was just like they were really weird projects. But it's fine. It just keeps the whole thing running.
Awesome, ma'am. Varun, thank you. First of all, let me say that I'm so glad that you were on the show, because I've looked up to you as a media entrepreneur, and I've looked up to Glitch as a agency where I'd like to build something like that, and it's so I'm so happy to have you on the show finally, and thank you for being here, man. I hope you had as much as great time as I did.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, man. Good fun.
Hey, I hope you liked the video, and I'm sure you did. If you did, you know the drill, like, share, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends, listeners. If you don't like such video conversations, you can check out our audio platforms that are out there. Our website is now live, www.thejuvenile.in. You can check that out. And with that being said, stay healthy, stay awesome, do some awesome stuff. Remember that you're one of a kind, live a kick-ass life, be kind to one another, and on that note, farewell, mates.
Hey guys, I'm Varun Dugirala. I'm the co-founder and content chief at The Glitch. You can listen to me, watch me. I think there are multiple formats of this, of what you can do on The Juvenile. So like, share, subscribe, listen, watch. I'm guessing I've covered most places. I don't know if you're on air. We're not on air, but you're on every other format, I'm guessing. So just listen to what we said. It was a fun conversation for me, so I'm sure you'll have fun too.